Hello and welcome to TAL Radio. At TAL, we connect those who are willing to give to those who are in need. My lovely listeners and my wonderful audience, you're listening and watching to a wonderful series on self coaching. And whenever I say self coaching, you know who's going to be the guest. Lovely to have Andrew Tallents with us once again. Andrew is a self coaching expert and he's been coaching leaders across the globe for almost a decade now. So, Andrew, welcome to TAL Radio.
Hi, Sandy. Thanks for having me again.
Lovely. And I'm sure listeners must be really wondering that what are we going to be talking about this week? And believe it or not, this is probably an episode after which everybody would be like, I cannot give any more excuses. I'm accountable now. So yes, as I just mentioned the word accountable. So we would be talking about accountability in leadership, holding yourself and others accountable for their actions and as such in life. So I would really start by asking, what does accountability really mean for leaders today?
Yeah, it's something that most leaders struggle with, and we see it in the workplace all the time. So, what it really means is if, as a leader, I say to you, I will do something, and then something happens, and maybe it doesn't happen, I take full ownership and accountability for the reasons that it didn't happen. And I say to you, I apologize, it didn't happen. These were the reasons. It was completely my responsibility. These are the reasons it didn't happen. And I want to make sure I can make amends and apologize to you. Or it's accountability where they make sure it happens because I've committed to doing something. And you and I both know we've experienced in the past where things don't happen and we never hear why, or it's always somebody else's fault. So this accountability around the self is about how we hold ourselves to account in commitments we make, and then holding others to account when somebody says they're going to do something and we ensure that they do it. So it's a very difficult area of leadership because it involves sometimes conflict.
I'm sure it really, involves conflict because it's not easy. I mean, it's easier said than done to say, okay, I did not and I apologize for it. So moving on, when we talk about accountability, how do you think it is different from the blame game or the fault findings?
Yeah. So again, this is usually, we've talked a little bit about this in previous episodes, but this is about our mindset. So if we are feeling positive or neutral about our world and our life, and things happen that maybe are outside of our control, we can take accountability to say, well, I should have considered those things. It's my responsibility. And again, I take that tone. If I'm feeling negative, my thoughts are to who else's fault could it be? I'm not going to take ownership of this. And therefore, I start to look for others where it could be their fault. So I blame, I actually think about negatively about people, and I don't actually think about the positive aspects of it. So it depends what kind of mood we're in. It depends on the kind of atmosphere we're in. Sometimes it's the people that trigger us. But blame is about toxicity in relationships where we just put the blame onto somebody else because we're not willing to take accountability.
Having said that, I mean, what really just triggered my mind, like when you say that you're accountable for something, is it something like being honest or being true? It's like, oh, I'm telling you the truth. This is how it has been. Is it similar to that?
A little bit. I think another way to think about it is it's actually not offering any excuses. So it's being truthful about maybe what I could have done differently. So I intended to do these things. I didn't do them, or I did them in a different way. And therefore, that's why this situation has occurred. But it's not putting in place excuses like I was tired, or I didn't have time, or the weather was bad, or the train was late, or whatever those things are. We have the ability to put them into a plan for us to make sure that we still do the things that we should do. And so that's probably the difference.
I just smile because the kind of excuses that you were just, naming out or calling out, I would say that is practically everybody. Even kids do the same. What?
Yeah, everyone does it. We all do it. Me, I do it. You do it. We all do it.
Lovely. So moving ahead, when we talk about self-coaching for leaders, how do you encourage leaders to view accountability and have them in their life as such?
There's two or three things that are important here from a self-coaching perspective. The first is that we need to be really realistic about what it is we commit to. Because if we commit to too much, the chances are we're not going to be able to do that and hold ourselves to account because we're busy. So the first thing is have realistic expectations of ourselves about what it is we commit to. The second thing is that if we recognize that actually what we've committed to maybe can't happen anymore because of certain circumstances, rather than just letting that happen, is to talk to the person that this affects and have that conversation about maybe changing the boundaries or the timeline or the goals. And that's about holding ourselves to account by saying, look, there may be a different outcome here. Let's agree what that looks like. But it's taking responsibility for that rather than just letting it happen. And then the third is actually this element about creating space and time for ourselves to make sure we think about the things we've committed to and what things might be moving away from us in terms of the things that we said we would deliver. So you need time and space to do that, to work out what it is that we're accountable for and what we said we would do. So they're the key things which you know and I know in a very busy work environment are very difficult to do. But if we're a leader, we have a responsibility to do those things.
And see, Andrew, there's a very amazing saying that, nobody is a born leader. People become leaders
Yeah.
technically. So it's not that they have all the habits in them. They inculcate habits, basically. When we talk about accountability, are there certain kind of daily rituals or routine or practices that you can actually follow, that one can follow and develop this basically accountability, develop in themselves?
Yeah. So the first one is to keep a list. This is a very simple thing, but it works really well. Is to keep a list of all the things that you said you would do tomorrow. Okay, so that's really important. So you know what it is you said you're going to do tomorrow. And what that allows you to do is look at the list and say, oh, well, my day is very busy. Can I do all those things? Or actually, do I need to maybe move some of those out in terms of timelines and communicate with the person that they affect? So that's the first thing, just making a list, very simple. The second thing you can do at the end of a day to build these habits is actually have a little bit of a self reflection. So maybe have 6 questions that you can ask yourself. Did I try my best today to do all the things I'm supposed to do? Did I let anybody down today by saying I would do something and didn't? Did I try to do too much today because I didn't have as much time? And just a number of questions which are right for you, maybe 5 or 6, which allow you to reflect on whether, again, you're taking on too much, because reflection is a lovely way to become aware in that sense. That's the second thing. And then the third thing we can do to build a habit is to get people to help us. So, for example, if somebody says to us, could you get that document to me as soon as you can? One of the ways we can get them to help us in terms of us delivering that and being accountable is say, yes, I can, but when's the latest that you can actually have that by? And they may
The
say,
deadline.
well, now I thought maybe next week. And then suddenly I can say, well, I can do that. But if they said tomorrow, then I probably couldn't. So we can get other people to help us just by asking some basic questions and be curious about timings of things. So many other things, but they're probably the 3 things we can do to build habits.
Self-reflection, as you mentioned, I think it's a really important thing. And not just for leaders, I would say for every individual, it's pretty important in life as such. And then when we just spoke about the excuses, so excuse is technically a trap. So, and when we come, when it comes to leaders, I'm sure they would love to be away from this trap. So, are there any ways that they can really, excuse the excuse trap and, have accountability in them?
So there's a really nice technique around this, which again, I would encourage everyone to think about. And again, it involves 3 things. So when I'm starting to actually think that I might be offering an excuse, then maybe before I do it, the thing for me to start thinking about is, am I thinking negatively about myself at the moment? So am I being self-critical? Am I actually maybe being critical of somebody else? So it might be somebody in relationship or one of my team. Or am I about to be critical of my situation in terms of the environment around me, the workplace, whatever it might be? And if the answer to any of those questions is yes, I'm about to be critical, it's more likely we're willing to offer an excuse at this point because we're feeling negative. So the way we can actually move out of that, if we're feeling any of those 3 things, is to actually just take a few breaths, maintain neutrality, trying to get into positivity, and then say, is this the right time for me to offer an excuse? Or can I be very honest and open up about why this has not happened? Sometimes it's because of me, sometimes it's because of what's happened somewhere else, but it's not an excuse. It's actually understanding the logic and the reason behind it. Nobody likes excuses. And when we hear them, we just know that they've not taken any responsibility or accountability for their own situation.
True, and I'm sure leaders get disappointed, especially when the team does that. So, talking about team, how do you feel that leaders can actually they inspire the teams also to inculcate accountability in themselves?
It's really hard to do. Again, we need space and time to do this. But the first thing to do is to make sure that the team are really clear on what are the things that need to be delivered today, this week, next month. And so there's clear deliverables. And once we've got clear deliverables, it means we can actually start measuring how people are moving towards those deliverables. So clarity on goals is the first thing. And it's amazing how many teams don't have clarity on goals. The second thing is to role model the accountability that when the leader does not deliver on a promise or a commitment, that they own up in front of the team immediately and they explain what's happened and why they've not been able to deliver. No excuses. They're actually taking ownership and accountability for it. It might be, I was tired. It might be, I was poorly. It might be, I just didn't have the capacity in terms of think about that at that time. But I'm showing that I'm vulnerable. I'm a human being and I've made a mistake. I'm owning up to it. So again, role modeling that for the team is the second way. And then the third way is to encourage the team to speak openly about the mistakes that they're making and the things they're owning. So what we can do as a leader is to make sure the team aren't blaming each other, offering excuses, and just being very open and honest about what they're struggling with and why they're not necessarily delivering against their accountabilities. So it's a very difficult thing to do for a leader. You build this over time, but it can be done with the right trust in the environment.
That was pretty thoughtful, and especially explaining it to other individuals that, this is the situation and now you need to hold yourself accountable. And it's just like, teaching a child that.
It is, and setting clear objectives. And it's very interesting here that you said this, and those out there that understand transactional analysis, where we have in a relationship either two adults interacting or there's some parent-child interactions going on. Even though I hear what you're saying, I think it's the same methodologies, but it's treating everybody as though they're an adult. Because as soon as we get into I'm treating them like a child, we tend to get childlike behavior, such as name calling, blaming, pointing, all those things. So it's, yes, teaching and setting a role model, but it's doing it in a way which is a positive.
Lovely. And Andrew, you've coached leaders, so many leaders across the globe, and I'm sure accountability is something that probably, you must have really delivered upon and they must have embraced it. What kind of changes have you seen in them now?
It's a really good question. I think the key thing to differentiate here is mostly when I ask a CEO that's got a board and stakeholders on their board, who is it that actually holds you to account on a daily and monthly basis? The answer that usually comes back 9 times out of 10 is me. There's only me holding me to account for my actions and responsibilities. The board does not hold me responsible. And that's really interesting because then what I say is, and this is where the change comes, if that's the case, how can you as a leader help your stakeholders that are around you to hold you to account? It's not good enough to say there's only me holding me to account. So that's actually, again, working with those stakeholders, whoever they are, that have an interest in your success, to set up targets and deliverables and give them permission to ask you questions about how you're doing against those targets and hold you to account. So that's the biggest change I see when I start working with leaders. They've maybe got some personal accountability, some of them, but it's about extending that out to invite others to hold them to account, which is very brave and courageous. But what it does do is focus our minds on the goals that everyone's working towards.
Especially, when leaders comes out and they say that they are accountable for whatever the wrong or the good things that have happened, basically. I mean, especially the wrong things which have happened. So do you feel somehow that without even teaching or inculcating into others, it actually sends out a message to the team that if this person can do it at this position, so can we?
Absolutely, because as human beings, we all have the ability to do it. And what it comes down to in the end is a couple of things. The first is for us to have the environment where we can do it, which is about space, reflection, being able to think about the things that we're doing. And the second thing is having somebody in relationship with you to support you in that. It's very difficult to do this on our own. So, for example, with one of my partners in my relationship, if I can give them permission, because I know I sometimes come to meetings late, if I can get them to help me to make sure I get to meetings on time rather than me just relying on myself, that's another way that people can do that. But yeah, we need to learn from the leader, and it's possible for everybody. We all have the capability as humans.
Lovely. So, before I wrap up this wonderful segment of accountability, since I'm accountable for the time, your time especially here.
Sure.
So, what is that one message or probably, one takeaway that, our listeners can really take away from this episode and inculcate accountability in
I
them?
think, every single person out there, doesn't matter what kind of leadership responsibility they have, whether it's small or large, It's about at the end of every day, just reflect a little bit about what could I have done differently today where I could have taken more ownership for my actions as opposed to blaming somebody else, offering an excuse. Just really do that. And then that's all we need to do, because that in itself means the next day we're more aware of how we can do something different. So that's all I think everyone listening to this can do today just to make a difference.
Lovely. Andrew, thank you so much for being with us today and talking and telling us so much about accountability. And believe it or not, I will be really accepting it that, every time we end the episode, I always tell Andrew that, you always talk like a saint. It's like such a profoundness you have when you talk, and especially when you deliver your thoughts. That no matter who's listening to you at what time, at what point in their life, I'm sure they must be doing a certain kind of self-reflection and really going through all the episodes and thinking, okay, this is what I've done wrong, and probably I need to rectify this thing in my life, and maybe that is how the relationship would also improve.
I appreciate your kind words. Thanks, Sandy.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And thanks a ton to my lovely audience and my dear listeners. So keep on listening to Tal Radio. Have a great day ahead.